Welcome to Fog Street Mysteries, where every story begins in shadows and every clue glows under a single street lamp. Here, classic noir meets modern storytelling, filled with sharp detectives, haunted secrets, impossible crimes, and twists waiting at every corner. If you love fog-soaked alleys, tense interrogations, and the electric thrill of unraveling a mystery, you're in the right place. Step inside, the next case is already waiting. Don't forget to share thoughts. Your feedback keeps the mystery alive. Now let's begin. Nero Wolfe&Rendezvous with a Corpse. Chapter 1, The Woman Who Wouldn't Sit Down. If you've ever watched a hummingbird that's had too much coffee, assuming hummingbirds drink coffee, you've got a fair picture of the woman who stood in Nero Wolfe's office that Wednesday at 11:12 a.m. She hovered. She darted. She trembled. What she absolutely did not do was sit down, even after I pulled out the red leather chair that has comforted more frantic behinds than I can count. No. I can't sit. I won't stay long, she said, voice thin as the stem of a champagne glass and about as close to shattering. Wolfe made a sound from behind his desk, deep in his throat, the kind that suggests the world had once again failed to consider his preference for peace, order, and unannounced visits from no one. He did not rise, he never does, but he tilted his head just enough to inform the universe that he disapproved. Madam, he rumbled, if you won't sit, then at least speak. She flinched like he'd cracked a whip. Someone is trying to destroy me. They want me blamed for something terrible. Something that hasn't happened yet. I'd heard enough wild entries to Wolfe's office to know when a client was nervous, but this one wasn't nervous. She was petrified. Her hands were clasped in a white-knuckle grip, her breath short, eyes flickering around the room as if she expected a sniper behind the filing cabinet. Your name? I asked. It's a standard opener, as any detective worth his alimony knows. Her mouth pressed into a thin line. No. I can't. If I give you my name, you'll be dragged into it. You came here, I reminded her. If you wanted anonymity, you should have tried the U.S. Army. They're experts at losing people. Wolfe closed his eyes, not in fatigue, but as a signal that the conversation had reached the limits of his patience. He opened them again with a slow blink that could curdle milk. Madam. Either speak with coherence or withdraw. I am not an oracle to be fed riddles. I can't explain, she whispered. Not yet. But something awful is about to happen, and someone wants me to take the blame. Who? I asked. She shook her head so violently her hatpin wobbled. I don't know. But they've been following me. Leaving messages. She stopped, trembling. Wolfe set his jaw. Archie. Remove this lady. I have orchids waiting, and I do not indulge babble. That did it. She gasped, turned on her heel, and fled so quickly that when the office door slammed, the air pressure shifted like a subway passing too fast. I stared at Wolfe. You charm them like always. He scowled. Pfui. She came with neither data nor purpose. She came scared. She came incoherent. He rose, yes, rose, an event rare enough to be marked in a calendar. I am going to the plant rooms. Disturb me only if civilization collapses. He left, and the office regained its familiar stillness. Unfortunately, I've learned that stillness is where trouble starts. I didn't expect to see the woman again. Usually, when Wolfe dismisses someone, they either forget their troubles or find another detective less demanding of facts and more tolerant of theatrics. But something about her haunted eyes lingered like cigar smoke. At 3:20 p.m., as I was typing a letter that Wolfe insisted needed to sound decisive but not imperious, meaning he wanted it to sound exactly like him, the phone rang. I need to meet you, a voice whispered. Mr. Goodwin. Tonight. Midnight. It was the hummingbird woman, shaken and breathless. Lady, if you want Wolfe on your case, this isn't the way. Talk now or... No, she hissed. Not on the phone. They're listening. Meet me at Pier 47, the old one by the Hudson. Midnight. Please, please come. Who's listening? What's? But she'd already hung up. I sat there, holding the receiver, feeling the prickle that comes when fate dumps an uninvited guest in your lap. There was something rotten here, and it wasn't Fritz's cooking, which is never rotten. Over dinner, a glorious braised lamb courtesy of Fritz, I told Wolfe about the call. He groaned. Archie. You are not going. I am. You are not, he repeated, settling his fork with the finality of a judge imposing sentence. She is unstable. She will waste your time. Maybe. Or maybe she's about to be in deep trouble. Wolfe glared. If you meet her, you will drag me into whatever mire she inhabits. That's practically a guarantee. He banged a fist lightly on the table, lightly for Wolfe, which still jostles the salt. Confound you. I refuse to be drawn into a nebulous crisis without parameters. But he knew me. And I knew him. Underneath the grumbling, Wolfe understood that when people cry for help, real help, the world would be short a few detectives if we didn't answer. I went anyway. New York at midnight is a different beast. The buildings stand like dark sentinels, the river smells of machinery and secrets, and the street lamps throw long shadows that move even when the wind doesn't. Pier 47 was as quiet as an abandoned cathedral, if cathedrals smelled like oil and fish. I walked carefully, hand near my pocket where a certain item of insurance rested. The moon was half hidden, casting the pier in uneven streaks of silver. Hello. I called softly. No answer. I moved toward a parked car near the end of the pier. The driver's side door was half open, swaying slightly in the breeze. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up like they were auditioning for a horror movie. I pulled the door wide. Inside was a man. Or had been. His head lolled to one side at an unnatural angle, and his eyes stared at nothing, wide, glassy, and accusing. His clothes were expensive, his shoes polished, and his chest sported a neat, fatal bullet hole. I let out a low whistle. Lady, what have you dragged me into? Then I heard it, footsteps. Soft, rapid. I turned, and there she was, the trembling woman from Wolfe's office, standing in the shadows, eyes wide with terror. You see, she gasped. I told you. I told you they would kill someone. Who is he? I stepped toward her. But she recoiled, shook her head wildly, and bolted, again, into the darkness. Hey! I shouted, but chasing a frightened rabbit in a maze of crates and shadows is a good way to get shot. Instead, I looked back at the corpse. Well. There went Wolfe's quiet evening. And mine. And possibly Kramer's ulcer. Whatever this case was, it had just turned from a hummingbird's panic into a full-fledged storm. And with my luck, it was heading straight for our brownstone. Chapter 2, Rendezvous with a Corpse. The corpse didn't say much. They seldom do, but this one was particularly unsocial. He sat there in the driver's seat, head tipped sideways like a badly balanced mannequin, eyes reflecting the Hudson's shiver of light. The bullet hole in his chest was clean, centered, and discouraging. A man who gets that kind of treatment is either very unlucky or knows someone who doesn't believe in half measures. I took a quick look around. The pier was quiet. The distant hum of traffic floated down from the west side highway, and a faint fog edged in off the water, making everything look like it had been dipped in bad milk. There was no sign of the woman, not so much as a scrap of her perfume. Lady, I muttered, your timing stinks. The car was a dark sedan, recent vintage, with the kind of shine that said its owner talked about chauffeur maintenance and meant it. I leaned in, careful not to smear prints I might want later, and checked the dash. The keys were still in the ignition. That told me two things: nobody had bothered to steal the car, and this wasn't a handy dummy dump, this was intended. I patted the man down, quick and professional. Wallet in the inside pocket, I slid it out, flipped it open, and let my eyes dance over the contents. The driver's license called him Harold C. Merle, address uptown, occupation not listed but suggested by the engraved card tucked alongside, Harold C. Merle, financial consultant. Another card bore a neat, tasteful logo, Quentin Dowlard and Company, Private Investments. I didn't know Quentin Dowlard personally, but I'd seen his name in the papers. When a man has private investments in Manhattan and his name appears above the fold, it usually means he's rich enough to be robbed, flattered, or subpoenaed. I put the wallet back where I'd found it. Whoever had killed Merle might not know what clues they'd left yet, and I wasn't in the mood to educate them. I backed away from the car, took one last look down the pier, and gave up on spotting the hummingbird lady. She'd flown again, and I didn't fancy stumbling around blindly in the shadows with a corpse at my back and a murderer possibly watching. I went to the nearest call box on the street and did what any law-abiding, clean-living, ethical citizen who works for Nero Wolfe would do. I called the police. Inspector Kramer arrived in under 15 minutes, dragging the night air and a bad temper along with him. He climbed out of the squad car, chewing a cigar that had done nothing to deserve the treatment. He spotted me, scowled, and came barreling over like a commuter who'd seen his train leaving. "Goodwin. Why is it you can't take a walk at midnight without tripping over a stiff?" "Just lucky," I said. "Maybe I should buy a lottery ticket." "Maybe you should find a new hobby," he growled. "Where is he?" I led the way back to the sedan, now surrounded by a few uniforms, a medical examiner's assistant, and one ambitious detective with a notebook and the nervous look of a man afraid to miss anything. Kramer leaned into the car, swore under his breath, then turned to me. "You touch anything?" "Only my conscience," I said. "And his wallet?" "It's back where I found it." I read the name. Kramer fixed me with a glare that suggested he was trying to decide if obstruction of justice could be retroactive. "You're not supposed to handle the body." "Then you're late telling me," I said. "You want the short version or the long one?" "The one that keeps me from dragging you downtown," he snapped. "Short it is. I was asked to meet a woman here. She talked to Wolfe earlier today, then called me. She sounded scared enough to make jitterbugs look slow. I show up. I find Mr. Merle with a hole in him. Then I see her in the shadows, same woman. Before I can get more than a hello out, she bolts. That's all." Kramer grunted. "Description?" "Medium height. Dark hair. Trim. Nervous enough to power a small city. Expensive coat, good shoes. Voice that's been educated out of saying ain't. Name?" She didn't give one. "And Wolfe let her in his office?" Kramer barked. "That fat orchid pot must be slipping." "You tell him that," I suggested. "I'd like to see the reaction." "I'll bring popcorn." He glared again, but there wasn't much he could do about Wolfe without probable cause, divine intervention, or a miracle. So far, he had none of the above. "Why were you meeting her here?" he demanded. "She said someone was going to frame her for something bad that hadn't happened yet," I said. "Apparently this qualifies." Kramer gnawed on the cigar. "She tell you who was after her?" "No." "What did Wolfe say about it?" "He said she was incoherent and to show her the door." "I did." "She found a murder instead." Kramer turned back to the car, jaw working. "You know who this is?" "Harold C. Merle. Financial consultant. Works with Quentin Dowlard." That got his attention. "Dowlard? The investment man?" "The same. I assume you've heard of him. If not, I suggest a newspaper subscription." Kramer grunted again, which is his way of admitting the universe has bothered him personally. This could be trouble. "I'd say that's a safe bet," I agreed. "You want my official statement now or will you come by the brownstone tomorrow?" throw a cigar at Wolfe, and do it in comfort. The brownstone, he said. 9 a.m. sharp. And Goodwin, his voice took on the edge of a buzz saw, if I find out you're holding out on me, I'll use you to test the quality of the city jail mattresses. You couldn't afford my opinion, I told him. He snorted, waved me off, and went back to the car, barking orders. They started the usual routine, photos, measurements, muttering. I'd seen it enough times to know there was nothing more for me to do except get out before some bright boy decided I'd look good in bracelets. I hailed a cab and headed home. The brownstone on West 35th Street looked as it always does at night, dark above, warm below. Fritz had left a lamp on in the hall, and I could smell something faint and pleasant drifting through the place, orchids and whatever Fritz had baked last. Nero Wolfe was in the office when I came in, settled in his custom-made chair like a mountain that had declared a truce with gravity. A book lay open on his lap. He closed it with a thumb but didn't mark the page. That meant his mind had already strayed to something else. Ah, he said. You have returned, intact. Are you intact, Archie? More or less. One dead man, one vanished woman, one annoyed inspector. The usual nightlife. He raised an eyebrow. Report. I gave it to him straight, the pier, the car, Harold C. Merle, the wallet, the logo, the woman, Kramer's arrival and interest in Dowlard. When I finished, Wolfe leaned his head back and closed his eyes. I waited. Sometimes he does that just to enjoy the silence. Sometimes he's assembling facts like a chess player lining up his pieces. It's my job to know which is which and not interrupt either. This woman, he said finally, eyes still closed, came here this morning to declare that she was to be framed for a crime yet uncommitted. You escorted her out. She later summoned you to the scene of a murder of a man connected to Quentin Dowlard. That's the shape of it. And she fled when she saw you had discovered the body. Correct. He opened his eyes, dark and annoyed. Confound her. We agree on that, I said. Also on the likelihood that Kramer will arrive at 9 looking for someone to throttle. He will suspect you, Wolfe said blandly. He does. And, by extension, me. That too. He sighed, a deep gust that rattled his vest. I do not choose to be suspected of murder, Archie. It interferes with my digestion. You could always leave town, I suggested. Rent a cottage in the country. Eat boiled potatoes and commune with cows. Pfui, he said. If Inspector Kramer wishes to have my cooperation, he will have it, as far as is compatible with my dignity and comfort. Meanwhile, this woman. She is either foolish, guilty, or being used. Or all three, I said. Possibly. He reached for the beer bottle on his desk and poured himself a glass, the foam rising modestly. You observed Merle's hands. Soft, I said. Office hands. Manicure. Gold watch. Nothing under the nails. No sign of a struggle. Then he expected whoever shot him, Wolfe said. Or did not see them in time. Could have been someone in the back seat, I offered. Or waiting outside when he stepped out. But the body was in the driver's seat when I arrived. The car itself, Wolfe continued. Well maintained. Immaculate. No clutter. No ashtray full of butts. A square piece of paper on the passenger floor, folded, maybe fell from someone's pocket. The cops will find it. Wolfe frowned slightly. You did not pick it up. Not with Kramer on the way. I have a sentimental attachment to my fingerprints. That may prove prudent. He sipped his beer. Quentin Dowlard. I know the name. A financier, private clients, considerable wealth. Men like that do not hire clerks, they hire advisors. Merle would have known secrets. Money trails. Weaknesses. And women? I said. Frequently, Wolfe agreed. Silence settled again, not awkward, just filled with possibilities neither of us could yet name. "So," I said, "what's the program for tomorrow?" Aside from Kramer trying to turn my head into a filing cabinet. "Tomorrow," Wolfe said, "you will accompany Inspector Kramer through the ritual of his questioning. You will be properly indignant and properly vague. Afterward, you will locate our elusive lady. Her return is essential." "She didn't seem keen on sticking around," I pointed out. "Then you must be persuasive," he said. "Your talents are not limited to repartee and typewriting." I yawned. "Flatter me some more and I might start charging extra." He ignored that. "Archie. This affair touches a wealthy man's house, a dead man's ledger, and a frightened woman's conscience. It will not be simple." "Wouldn't want it to be," I said. "We might get bored." "I," Wolfe replied pontifically, "am incapable of boredom. Only irritation." "Then you'll love what's coming," I told him. I didn't know, then, how right I was. Chapter 3, Wolfe Takes the Case, by Force. At 9 a.m. sharp, meaning exactly when Nero Wolfe least wished to see him, Inspector Kramer rang the bell. The timing alone told me he was in a mood to bite something harder than his cigar. Fritz let him in because Fritz is a gentleman, but the look on Kramer's face said he would have preferred being greeted by a punching bag. I ushered him into the office, where Wolfe sat in all his morning glory, massive, immovable, and marinating in a fresh layer of irritation. He had the air of a man pried away from his orchids, which, in fairness, he had been. His lips compressed into a line thin enough to slice cheese. Kramer wasted no time. "All right, Wolfe," he barked, slapping his hat onto the nearest table, "your boy was at the scene of a murder last night. A murder involving a man who worked for Quentin Dollard. And your mysterious visitor, who we can't identify, was there too. So you're in the soup." Wolfe closed his eyes, inhaled slowly, and exhaled even more slowly. "Inspector, if you intend melodrama, kindly moderate the volume. I am not deaf." "Then act like it," Kramer snapped. "Why was Goodwin meeting a woman involved in a homicide?" "He went," Wolfe said, "because she summoned him. If you wish to scold her for that, you must locate her first." Kramer's cigar jumped with every syllable. "Don't get cute. Your office hosted her. Your man met her. A corpse showed up. These lines intersect, Wolfe." Wolfe's eyes opened a fraction. "Geometrically, perhaps. Logically, not yet." Kramer swung to face me. "Goodwin. You left things out last night. I want the whole story. Every detail." "I gave you every detail that existed," I told him. "If the universe has manufactured new ones overnight, it didn't notify me." He took a few lumbering steps around the office, hands behind his back. "Harold Merle's office was searched," he said. "Ransacked. Papers everywhere. Not burglary, someone looking for something specific." "Merle's killer?" I asked. "Or someone connected. Maybe your mystery woman." Wolfe made a noise halfway between a snort and a philosopher's sigh. "The woman is frightened, Inspector, not destructive. If she ransacked an office, she would likely break the furniture in her haste." Kramer pounced. "So you do know her?" "I know her disposition," Wolfe said sharply. "Not her name, not her origin, and certainly not her role in last night's event. You expelled her before we could inquire." Kramer turned the full furnace of his glare on me. "Why'd you meet her, Goodwin? Why the pier? Why midnight?" "Because she asked nicely," I said. "And because she sounded scared enough to melt steel." Kramer didn't appreciate the poetry. "Or she played you," he growled. "That's also possible," I admitted. "I attract complicated women." Wolfe slammed his palm on the desk, not hard, but with enough authority to signal that conversational chaos was hereby cancelled. Inspector Kramer, he said in a tone approaching regal, your implications are tiresome. Archie did not kill Harold Merle. I did not kill Harold Merle. And unless you can locate a shred of evidence to the contrary, we are not to be harassed. Kramer folded his arms. You'll be harassed until I'm satisfied. Then, Wolfe said coolly, satisfaction is your burden. Kramer inhaled through his teeth. I braced myself for a tirade, but instead he bent, grabbed his hat, and jammed it onto his head. Fine. But listen to me, until we find that woman, every angle of this mess points back to this house. He stormed out, trailing smoke, threats, and the faint odor of governmental frustration. The room stayed quiet for a moment after the door closed. Then Wolfe groaned, a long rumble like an irritated volcano. Archie, he said, I will not tolerate the suspicion of homicide. Then we should help Kramer find the killer, I suggested. Or at least find the woman. Wolfe glared at me as if I proposed we enter a pie-eating contest at a county fair. I do not chase mysteries, Archie. They come to me. This one already came. Twice. He grunted. Confound it. Bring me the morning papers. I handed him the Gazette, the Times, and the World Telegram. He flipped through them with his usual disdain, stopping only when he reached the Gazette's headline. Financier's advisor found slain, police investigate possible racket angle. Wolfe snorted. Rubbish. When a man tied to millions dies, the motive is seldom so trite. And the missing woman? I said. She is our fulcrum, Wolfe murmured. Someone wishes her blamed. Someone maneuvered her into your path. Someone anticipates her fear. Meaning she's a pawn, I said. Or a witness, Wolfe added. Or an instrument. Or innocent, I suggested. That too. He rang for Fritz. Coffee, he commanded. And Archie, you will find her. I blinked. Just like that. No clues. No direction. No rational basis. No, Wolfe said. Only necessity. Swell, I muttered. Does necessity cover cab fare? He ignored that. I began with the basics, retracing steps, checking hotels, reviewing missing person bulletins, and calling Saul Panzer, who can find a whisper in a hurricane if paid enough. Saul hadn't seen the woman, but he promised to start canvassing. By noon, I had a list of 3 possible leads and one very sore pair of feet. I swung by a diner on 10th Avenue to refuel, coffee thick enough to varnish furniture and a sandwich that offended 3 food groups. From there I hailed a cab and headed to Harold Merle's apartment. The doorman, a tall fellow with the scruffy dignity of a part-time philosopher, tried to shoo me away until I flashed a smile and a card that said Archie Goodwin, Investigations. People often assume that's authoritative, and I never try to correct them. Merle's place was tidy, expensive, and lonelier than a politician on election day. Nothing out of place, nothing interesting, except a framed photograph on the mantel. The woman in the picture had sharp eyes, strong features, and an expression suggesting she could negotiate peace treaties before breakfast. A label on the frame read, Marjorie Merle. I took note. Wives of dead men often know things they'd never admit before widowhood. Back on the street, I called Wolfe. Well, he asked, sounding as if I'd delayed him from an urgent appointment with a beer. Merle was married, I said. Wife living. No sign of our jittery lady here. Her absence was predictable. Continue. What about Dowlard? I asked. Should we reach out? His advisor being murdered ought to interest him. Wolfe grumbled. It will interest him excessively. And he will come to us, Archie. Men like Dowlard always do when they fear exposure. Meanwhile, the woman, find her. I'm trying. Try more proficiently. He hung up. I hit the sidewalks again. By late afternoon, I had pounded enough pavement to file for workers' comp. Nothing. No mysterious woman, no leads, just a growing suspicion that she had evaporated. When I returned home, Wolfe was in the office, leaning back with his eyes closed while Fritz served him a mug of beer cold enough to raise frostbite concerns. Without opening his eyes, Wolfe said, "Report." "You're really fond of that word today," I said. "Anyway, Merle's home yields nothing. His wife exists. Saul's searching. I'm down $6 in cab fare and one good mood." Wolfe opened one eye. "You must do better." "What do you expect?" "She didn't leave a forwarding address." "Women who are frightened always seek one of two things, anonymity or protection," Wolfe said. "She has neither. She will surface. And until then?" "Until then," Wolfe sighed, "we must prepare for Quentin Dallard's inevitable intrusion." That sounded like a prophecy. And as prophecies go, it came true faster than predicted. At 6:42 p.m., the doorbell rang again. I went to get it. Standing there was a man in a fur-lined coat worth more than my yearly paycheck, with a face that said he'd inherited his fortune but not his patience. "I," he announced, "am Quentin Dallard. I must speak with Nero Wolfe." The mountain in the yellow chair straightened, and his eyes gleamed, not with pleasure, but with the grim understanding that he had just been conscripted into someone else's war. Wolfe had wanted to avoid the case. Now it had walked in the front door. Chapter 4, A Millionaire with Too Many Secrets. The trouble with millionaires is that they walk around thinking the air is filtered special just for them. Quentin Dallard strolled into Wolfe's office with that precise level of personal confidence, the kind that assumes chairs will move aside, doors will open wider, and lesser men will spontaneously salute. He removed his coat with an elegant shrug, one of those gestures that says, "I've never carried anything heavier than a cocktail glass," and handed it to me without looking. I didn't take it. Not because I was feeling contrary, but because I don't accept unearned coats from men who might soon be suspects. The look he finally turned on me suggested I'd failed an audition I didn't know I was in. Wolfe cleared his throat, which in our office is the equivalent of a courtroom gavel. "Mr. Dallard, please sit," he said, gesturing toward the red leather chair usually reserved for clients, witnesses, and the occasional lunatic. Dallard sat, though he looked as if the chair ought to thank him for the honor. "I learned this morning," he began, "that my financial advisor, Harold Merle, has been murdered. The police tell me Mr. Goodwin," he flicked his gaze at me like shooing a fly, "found the body." "He discovered it," Wolfe corrected. "He did not place it there." "I didn't suggest he did," Dallard replied smoothly, though the air carried a faint scent of implication. Wolfe eyed him. "You came for a purpose. State it." Dallard leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I believe Mr. Merle's death is linked to my business affairs. He was more than an advisor. He monitored sensitive transactions, oversaw discreet investments, handled matters that required, shall we say, insulation. Meaning secrecy, I translated. Yes. And the kind of secrecy that makes enemies." Wolfe's fingers drummed once on the arm of his chair. "You suspect foul play tied to your finances." "I don't suspect it," Dallard said. "I'm certain." I watched Wolfe's face, a useful habit if you want to understand a man who speaks more with silence than the rest of us do with full paragraphs. His eyebrows lifted just enough to signal interest, not enthusiasm, but a mild disturbance of that massive internal equilibrium he calls a mind. "Mr. Dallard," Wolfe said, "the police would have you report anything relevant." "I have." "All of it?" Dallard hesitated, half a heartbeat, but a noticeable one if you happen to make a living catching hesitations. "There are complexities," he said finally. "No doubt," Wolfe murmured. "Nevertheless, if I am to assist, you must indulge me with details." Dallard shifted, lowered his voice, and began. 3 months ago, Merle informed me that a substantial sum, nearly $80,000, was missing from one of our investment accounts. He believed it was an internal theft. Quiet, deliberate, systematic. It wasn't public knowledge. I asked. He gave me a faint, politely hostile smile. Mr. Goodwin, if it had been public, you would have read about my financial funeral by now. Wolfe interjected. Merle suspected someone. Yes, Dollard said. But he refused to tell me who until he had proof. He asked for time. I gave it to him. And now he is dead, Wolfe said. Yes. Wolfe leaned back, eyes narrowing. You believe Merle identified the thief, confronted them, and was silenced. That is my concern. What about Merle's wife? I asked. Did she know anything about his investigation? Dollard blinked with mild surprise, as if it had never occurred to him that wives might matter. I doubt it. Marjorie and Harold led mostly independent lives. She enjoyed social circles. Harold enjoyed balance sheets. That matched the photo I'd seen. Marjorie Merle had the face of a woman who organizes charity galas while her husband quietly panics over missing commas. Wolfe shifted his weight, a monumental gesture. Mr. Dollard, tell me, did Merle seem afraid? Disturbed? Uneasy? No, Dollard said firmly. He was confident. Determined. He believed he was onto something significant, that's the word he used. Last week, he told me he expected to present me with everything soon. And now he will present nothing, Wolfe murmured. Dollard bristled. Which is why I need you, Wolfe. The police are competent in their way, but they do not understand the delicacy of private financial structures. You do. Wolfe's expression froze into something resembling intellectual frostbite. I understand logic, not legerdemain. There is payment, Dollard added, as if that would melt glaciers. Wolfe didn't blink. I will not decide until I have the facts. Then gather them, Dollard said, rising with impatience. Learn who murdered Harold. And if Merle left any notes, documents, or confidences in your possession. He did not, Wolfe said curtly. Dollard studied him, weighing the words, then buttoned his coat with exact precision. I expect to hear from you soon. He left with the gait of a man who is accustomed to walking out of rooms he assumes will collapse behind him. When the door closed, Wolfe blew out a breath that fluttered the half-open pages of the morning newspaper. Well, he said. It's nice, I commented, to meet a man whose arrogance is so polished you can see your reflection in it. Wolfe scowled. Confound him. He withheld information. Which part? I asked. All of it, Wolfe said. A man who believes his advisor has stolen from him or that his empire is under threat does not behave so calmly unless he knows more than he admits. And Merle's missing funds? A distraction, Wolfe said. Possibly real, but not the fulcrum. Something else is at play. I stretched my legs. So what's my assignment? You will visit Mrs. Merle, Wolfe said. A widow often reveals truths a wife would not. I've met widows, I said. Some reveal everything, some reveal nothing. Then ascertain which she is. He pulled a fresh beer from the drawer. And Archie, before you go, did you note Mr. Dollard's hands? Immaculate. Manicure, soft palms, fingers like a concert pianist who hires someone else to lift the piano. Indeed, Wolfe murmured. A man who has never engaged in violence. You're thinking he's not our killer. I am thinking, Wolfe said, that he knows who is. I headed out into the city, the winter air sharp enough to trim eyebrows. Traffic honked, vendors shouted, taxis weaved like caffeinated snakes. The Manhattan of the mid-century isn't for the timid, it's a place where everyone walks too fast and talks too loud, and the subways rumble with the sound of ambition and indigestion. Mrs. Merle lived on the Upper East Side, in a tasteful building with doormen trained to frown at anyone who passes by without a mink coat. She greeted me in a navy dress tailored to perfection and eyes that had experienced grief but not yet fully processed it. Her hand trembled only once, when she offered me tea, and then the tremor was gone. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, leading me into the sitting room, "I knew the police would come, but I didn't expect private inquiries." "We're supplementing the police," I said diplomatically. "Wolfe likes to understand the broader picture." She nodded. Harold would approve. He believed in details. "Did he tell you anything unusual before last night?" Her fingers tightened on her teacup. Harold kept his professional affairs separate. But he was worried. Not frightened, Harold didn't frighten easily, but concerned. He said he'd discovered something rotten. Something that threatened more than money. Threatened what? She hesitated. He didn't say. Only that someone was watching. Someone close. A shiver of interest ran through me. Did he mention names? No. But, she swallowed, there was a woman he'd argued with recently. A secretary from Dallard's office. She came by one afternoon. They spoke privately. She left looking shaken. My heart pulled a tight little somersault. Her name? I don't recall. Lydia, something. Lydia. Our hummingbird had a name at last. But before I could ask more, Mrs. Merle continued. Harold said she was in danger. That she didn't understand how deep the trouble ran. Then he told me not to speak of it unless forced. And now. Her voice cracked, but she recovered fast. If you can learn the truth, Mr. Goodwin, please do. I left with more questions than answers, but at least now we had Lydia, a motive brewing in Dallard's office, and a web of secrets tightening around every conversation. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe listened to my report with his eyes half closed and his lips pressed together like overstuffed luggage. When I finished, he opened his eyes fully. Lydia, he said softly. So she did know something. Enough to be dangerous, I said. Or enough, Wolfe corrected, to be silenced. He took a sip of beer. Archie, this case is no longer a request. It is an imperative. Meaning? His voice deepened. We will find Lydia Verdon. And through her, we will find the truth behind Merle's death. I sighed. And Kramer? Wolfe lifted his glass. Kramer, he said, will just have to endure us. Chapter 5, The Orchid Interruption and a Break in the Case. The next morning began the way most mornings do when Nero Wolfe has a murder on his plate, meaning he pretended life was normal, and I pretended not to notice his pretense. At 9 a.m., he was perched in his oversized chair like an emperor forced to endure the indignities of the common world, paperwork, correspondence, and the gnawing annoyance of unsolved crime. At 10:45, his sacred orchid hour approached. Wolfe spends those 2 hours a day in the plant rooms on the top floor, misting, pruning, whispering sweet botanical nothings to orchids that cost more individually than my annual wardrobe. Interrupting him during that period qualifies as a capital offense in the brownstone. But things were heating up, and I didn't care to let the case simmer while he was flirting with flowers. You'll want to stay accessible, I told him as he rose from his chair, already shifting into his orchid trance. Saul might call. Wolfe puffed. Saul Panzer is reliable enough to call afternoon. Maybe. But this Lydia business is turning into a rabbit's maze. He turned the full weight of his reproachful stare on me. Archie. Must I remind you? My orchid hours are inviolable. No, but the law doesn't know that. And Kramer doesn't care. Wolfe's nostrils flared. Pfui. The inspector would interrupt me to inquire after the mating habits of fish. He headed upstairs. My last hope dissolved like butter in Fritz's skillet. Saul Panzer phoned at 11:12, exactly when Wolfe was waist-deep in orchids, humming to them like a baritone bumblebee. Restrained man that I am, I did not storm upstairs. That would have been suicide by horticulture. Instead, I picked up the phone and let Saul's velvet-smooth voice deliver something useful at last. Archie, found your girl. Lydia? The same. She's calling herself Linda Vernon, renting room 3B at a boarding house on East 29th. That location wasn't exactly a high society hideout, more like a spot where dreams go to save money and eventually die in a cheap trunk. She alone? I asked. As far as I can tell. She's been there 2 nights. Stays inside mostly. Looks scared. That's her signature look. Want me to keep watch? No, I said. I'll take it from here. And Saul, thanks. He grunted, which for Saul is like sending roses and a handwritten sonnet. I hung up, glanced upward at Wolfe's sanctum, and debated whether the news counted as an emergency. It did. But Wolfe's judgment of emergencies differs from mine. To Wolfe, an emergency is when Fritz overcooks something by 1 degree or an orchid falls slightly out of symmetry. Still, I marched upstairs. The door to the plant room stood slightly ajar. I peeked in. Wolfe was leaning over a bench of pink Miltonias, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his expression rapt. I cleared my throat. Nothing. I cleared it again, louder. Still nothing. So I introduced myself to Destiny and said, "Wolfe, I've got her." He froze. Didn't turn. Didn't straighten. Just froze, like a man whose entire inner machinery had halted mid-cog. "Confound you, Archie," he murmured, still staring at the orchids. "You had better mean that." "I mean it. Lydia's been found." Saul tracked her. Boarding house on East 29th. Slowly, very slowly, Wolfe stood upright, his bulk rising with the deliberate grace of a dirigible taking flight. He faced me. His eyes were sharp, alive, brilliant. "Alive?" he demanded. "For now." "Looks rattled but intact." "Then why," he said, "are you still here?" "Your orchids." "Hang the orchids," he thundered. That was when I knew just how serious things had become. Wolfe doesn't hang orchids, figuratively or literally. But Lydia Verdon had climbed to the top shelf of his curiosity. He jabbed a finger at me. "Bring her here. Do not lose her. Do not alarm her. Do not, under any circumstances, permit her to vanish again." "I'll do my best," I said. "But she runs faster scared than I do caffeinated." "Then motivate her," he declared. If Wolfe ever runs out of detecting work, he could have a promising career in motivational speaking for panicked fugitives. The boarding house on East 29th looked like it washed ashore after fleeing a nicer neighborhood. The bricks sagged, the windows squinted, and the front steps gave the impression that they were tired of being steps and were considering a career change. I knocked on the door of room 3B. No answer. I knocked again, then said softly, "Lydia." "It's me. Archie Goodwin. I'm here to help." Silence. Then a click. The lock turned, the door opened a crack, and one terrified eye peered out at me. "Go away," she whispered. "They followed me. They're watching." "Nobody followed me," I said. "And if they're watching, they're in for a boring show. Let me in." "No. Look, you came to Wolfe for help. Now Wolfe wants to help you. But he can't do it with you hiding in a room that smells like boiled socks." Another silence. Then the door opened enough for me to slip in. Lydia Verdon looked worse than the first 2 times I'd seen her. Same dark hair, same fine-boned face, but the fear had settled in her features like dust. "You shouldn't have come," she said. "I put you in danger." "Lady, I'm in danger every time Wolfe disapproves of a necktie I wear. It hasn't killed me yet." She sank into a rickety chair. "Harold is dead." "I know. He shouldn't be. He knew something terrible. And he told me." She stopped, biting her lip. "Told you what?" "I can't say. I promised him." "Promises to dead men are tricky," I said. They're hard to keep when you're next on the list. She shuddered. I don't know who to trust. Start with Wolfe. He may not smile, but he's reliable. And he wants you safe. She stared at me with those frightened eyes, and for a second I thought she might refuse again. But then she stood. All right, she whispered. Take me there. That was my cue. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe waited in the office, his expression set to maximum gravity. When Lydia entered, she froze like a rabbit spotting a hawk. Miss Verdon, Wolfe said, not unkindly. You have caused considerable inconvenience. She blinked. I'm sorry. Don't apologize, Wolfe said. Just sit. She did. And then, for the first time, she talked. Not fast. Not in a torrent. But in quiet, trembling pieces. Harold. Mr. Merle found something in Mr. Dallard's accounts. A discrepancy. A large sum moved into a private channel. He said it wasn't just theft, it was deliberate, dangerous. He believed Mr. Dallard was involved. Wolfe's eyebrow rose the width of a ruler. And you? Harold told me to disappear until he confronted whoever was responsible. Then he would clear everything. She wrung her hands. But instead, Wolfe finished, he died. She nodded. Did he leave you anything? Wolfe asked. A document? A note? Evidence? Lydia hesitated. That pause told me more than words. Lydia, I said gently, if you're holding something that got Harold killed, you need to hand it over. She opened her purse with trembling fingers and pulled out a folded, yellowed scrap of paper. The top corner was torn, cleanly, jaggedly, like it had once been part of a bigger page. It's all I have, she whispered. Harold gave it to me the day before he died. He said to hide it. That the rest of the page would explain everything. Wolfe took the scrap delicately, laid it flat on his desk, and studied it. It wasn't much. A column of numbers. A date. An initial. But Wolfe's breathing changed, the subtle shift that means his brain is hopping fences faster than I can follow. This, he murmured, is a hinge. For what? I asked. For the truth, Wolfe said. But we require the rest. And where is it? I asked Lydia. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Someone broke into Harold's office the night he died. They were looking for it. Wolfe leaned back. Then we must find it first. Lydia sagged, exhausted. Please. Help me. I don't want to die. Wolfe nodded once, slow and solemn. You will not die, he said. Archie will see to that. Great. Just what I needed, promotion to bodyguard for a terrified secretary while a murderer hunted loose. But Wolfe's voice had carried finality, and I knew one thing. This case had shifted into high gear. And someone, somewhere, had just realized we were closing in. Chapter 6, Lydia Talks. Almost. If there is one thing Nero Wolfe detests more than murder, it's an incomplete explanation. And Lydia Verdon, fragile, jittery, and terrified enough to jump at her own shadow, had just handed him a sliver of truth too thin to spread on toast. Wolfe stared at the torn scrap of ledger paper she'd surrendered, turning it this way and that like a jeweler examining a flawed diamond. It is inadequate, he announced. Well, sure, I said. But it beats the blank page we had before. It is a fragment, Wolfe insisted. One must not base conclusions on fragments. They deceive. Lydia sat small and pale in the red leather chair, hands clasped like she expected them to fall apart if she loosened her grip. It's all Harold gave me, she whispered. He said the rest of the page would explain everything, but he didn't tell me where it was. Did he hint? Wolfe asked. No. Did he imply? No. Did he gesture vaguely in any direction whatsoever? She blinked at him, bewildered. I don't think so. Wolfe snorted. Confound that man. Even dead he is obstinate. I stood behind Lydia's chair, keeping watch. Last night's little midnight pier adventure had made me acutely aware of how quickly people can vanish, or be vanished. Let's work with what we have, I said. You said Harold believed someone was stealing from Dallard's accounts. Yes. And this sheet, what's left of it, shows transactions. I think so. Harold told me the numbers proved everything. Wolfe turned to me. Get Saul. That was the magic phrase. Whenever Saul Panzer enters the picture, things go from murky to slightly less murky with a good chance of clarity down the road. But before I could reach the phone, Wolfe lifted a hand. Wait. Miss Verdon. Lydia tensed. You said Harold warned you that you were in danger. Why? She swallowed. He didn't say. Only that someone might try to scare me away. From what? I don't know. But I think he wanted me to hold on to that page so the truth wouldn't die with him. Yet you did not come to the police, Wolfe pointed out. They frighten me, she said. They always look like they're accusing someone. They are, I told her. That's their job. Mine is being accused by them, which I'm moderately good at. Wolfe tapped the scrap of paper. Miss Verdon, there are 3 possibilities. You know more than you realize. You know more than you admit. Or you know nothing, and you are a pawn. Which is correct? She dropped her gaze. I don't know. Wolfe sighed. We must discover the origin of this fragment. Archie. On it. But as I reached for the phone again, the doorbell rang. My spine stiffened. No appointment was on the books. And uninvited guests tended to fall into 2 categories, police inspectors and killers. Only one of those rings twice, and the bell had rung once. I cracked the front door open with my foot braced against the inner rug. A courier stood there, cap low, eyes mostly hidden. He held a folded newspaper under one arm. Delivery, he said. Who for? I asked. He shrugged. The big guy. Wolfe. Name? He gave another shrug, harder this time, like I'd asked him to recite poetry. Buddy, I said, try another house. We don't sign for mysteries. He shoved the newspaper at me and bolted, vanishing down the steps like a jackrabbit trying out for track. That was suspicious enough to qualify for a merit badge. I carried the paper inside. Wolfe raised an eyebrow. The Gazette, he asked. No. Today's Times. Bah. Worthless. Maybe, but it came with a bonus. I unfolded it. A rectangle had been cut neatly out of page 4, the classifieds, and taped inside that hollow was a handwritten message. Stop looking for her. Next time you won't be lucky. I handed it to Wolfe. He turned the paper. Turned it again. Then let it fall to the desk with a noise of deep displeasure. Archie, he said, explain. The courier didn't wait. Didn't give a name. Didn't look like a courier. And this note is meant for either us or Lydia. Maybe both. Lydia's breath hitched. They know I'm here. Unclear, Wolfe said. But likely. That was when she stood abruptly. I should leave. I can't endanger you. No, Wolfe said sharply. You must stay until we determine who is threatening you. Leaving will expedite neither your safety nor our inquiry. I gestured toward the kitchen. Fritz can make you tea. And Wolfe can tell you scary stories about financial fraud. Her lips trembled, but she nodded and followed Fritz out the door. Wolfe watched her leave, then turned to me with the expression of a man contemplating the structural flaws of the universe. We must move quickly, he said. Whoever killed Merle does not wish her found. And now they know she's here, I said. Possibly. Or they suspect. But either is unacceptable. Saul, then? I asked. Yes. I dialed him. Saul answered on the second ring with his usual efficient calm. We've got a situation, I told him. A courier delivered a threat. Lydia's in our house. We need to know who's watching her. Understood, Saul said. I'll circle the block. Good. And Saul, stay invisible. Always. After I hung up, Wolfe beckoned me closer. Archie, the numbers on this sheet, note the pattern. I looked. Looks like account entries. Dates. Amounts. And an initial in the corner. Q, Wolfe pointed. Which suggests Quentin Dollard. Which could mean he authorized the transaction. Or someone forged his mark, Wolfe said. If Merle was investigating internal theft, a forged initial might be the linchpin. Or the killer, I added. Precisely. But before he could continue, Lydia returned, white as chalk. There was a man, she whispered. Outside. Across the street. Watching your brownstone. That's New York, I said. Half the city watches the other half. He stared directly at your windows. Wolfe shot me a look. Archie. Right. I'll go. I stepped out onto the sidewalk, strolling casually like I had nothing more on my mind than whether the local diner's apple pie was fit for human consumption. But Lydia was right, A man in a brown overcoat stood across the street, leaning against a lamppost, feigning disinterest badly enough that I could smell his intention. I crossed the street. He straightened, startled, then turned and began walking fast. I followed. He turned the corner. I sped up. He broke into a run. I took off after him. We darted around pedestrians, clipped a fruit stand, and almost caused a taxi pileup. He was good, fast, nimble, knew the alleys. But the mistake he made was trying to outrun me instead of outsmart me. He ducked into a side street, thinking I'd overshoot. I didn't. I rounded the corner just in time to see the flash of something metallic, probably his pistol, before he fired. The shot cracked past my shoulder and buried itself in brick. I dove behind a garbage bin. By the time I sprang up again, ready to chase, the overcoat man was gone. Not just gone. Erased. I jogged back to the brownstone, displeasure percolating. Inside, Wolfe demanded, well. He ran. He shot. He vanished. Wolfe exhaled a deep rumble. I abhor incompetence, especially when it is not mine. Lydia looked shaken. He wants me dead. Yes, Wolfe said calmly. But we will not permit it. I sat down. The shooter was good. Professional. Someone with reason to keep Lydia quiet. Wolfe tapped the fragment on his desk again. This paper, Archie. The missing page. The threat. The shooter. They are part of a single design. And the fulcrum is Lydia. She swallowed. I don't understand any of it. You will, Wolfe said. But not tonight. What do we do now? I asked. Wolfe opened a bottle of beer with the finality of a man preparing for long thought. Now, he said, we force our opponent's hand. And how do we do that? He closed his eyes. By finding the rest of the page. That sounded simple. Which meant it was going to be impossible. And judging by Wolfe's expression, he intended for me to do the impossible part. Chapter 7, Wolfe Sets the Trap. When Nero Wolfe decides to set a trap, the universe tends to shift uncomfortably, like it knows someone is about to get caught. By noon the next day, Wolfe was settled in his oversized chair with the sort of grim satisfaction a spider must feel when it finishes spinning a web. All that remained was to lure the flies. It requires boldness, Wolfe declared, and that burden, Archie, falls to you. No surprise, I said. Do I get hazard pay? You get employment, he retorted. Be grateful. Wolfe's plan was simple in the way that assembling a watch blindfolded is simple. First, I was to gather the main suspects. That meant Quentin Dowlard, Mrs. Marjorie Merle, the gilded widow, Dallard's two business rivals he'd hinted at during our earlier talk, and the chauffeur from Merle's building, a man with the morals of a coat rack and slightly less personality. And Kramer? I asked. Wolfe's mouth twitched. Kramer will come whether or not we summon him. He cannot resist the prospect of interrupting me. Good, I said. Because once he hears what we're up to, he'll be ready to bite through steel. Wolfe lifted a hand. Archie. Less sarcasm, more efficiency. Go. The gathering of the suspects. New York is a city built for confrontations. People argue on subways, street corners, and in lines at delis. But gathering suspects for a showdown in Nero Wolfe's office? That requires tact, cunning, and a willingness to lie through your teeth while keeping a straight face. I began with Quentin Dowlard. His secretary tried to stonewall me, but I've been stonewalled by experts, and she wasn't one. 10 minutes later, I was in Dallard's office watching him sip brandy at an hour that suggested his liver had given up and gone home. I need you at the brownstone at 6, I told him. He lifted an eyebrow. Must I ask why? You may, I said cheerfully. I won't answer. He frowned. This is highly irregular. So is murder, I replied. But you're tangled in one, and Wolfe is ready to untangle you if you show up. He hesitated, always a good sign, then nodded curtly. 6. Next came the widow Merle. She opened the door herself, eyes tired, expression polite but wary. Mrs. Merle, I said, Wolfe requires your presence at 6 sharp tonight. Why? Because the alternative is Kramer pounding down your door demanding answers you may not want to give without legal counsel. Wolfe is the kinder option. That convinced her. The rivals were trickier. One was a skeletal investment shark with fingers like prying tools. The other was a red-faced man who looked as if he wanted to punch the stock market for disappointing him. Both resisted invitations until I mentioned that Wolfe believed they could clarify matters. And by clarify, I meant defend themselves from suspicion of murder. People tend to show up when their reputations or freedom are at stake. The chauffeur was last. He tried to bluff that he barely knew Merle, but his eyes flickered like a bad neon sign when I mentioned Lydia Verdon. After 10 minutes of pressure, applied by yours truly, he agreed to come. The cast was assembled. Now all we needed was a stage, and the director. Wolfe's preparations. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe sat with the composure of a man preparing to lecture a room of unruly schoolchildren with secrets, money, and possibly guns. Archie, he said, arrange the chairs. Any particular order? I asked. Yes. Place them where I can see everyone. But do not encourage intimacy, they will not enjoy what is to come. I arranged 5 chairs in a semicircle around Wolfe's desk. He approved with a grunt. And Kramer? I asked. He will arrive shortly, Wolfe said. Did you tell him? No. Then he knows. True enough. At 5:40 p.m., the doorbell rang, and Inspector Kramer stomped into the office with the expression of a man who just discovered someone else had touched his cigar. What, he said, are you up to, Wolfe? Good evening, Inspector, Wolfe replied smoothly. You are just in time. For what? Kramer growled. The denouement, Wolfe said. You don't have a denouement, Kramer snapped. You barely have a beginning. Wolfe steepled his fingers. Sit. You may find yourself entertained. Kramer didn't sit. He paced. That was fine, pacing gave him the illusion of control. The guests arrive. One by one, the suspects arrived. Dowlard, immaculate as ever, entered first. He looked around the office, his gaze lingering on Kramer, then Wolfe, then the chairs. He did not sit until Wolfe gestured. Mrs. Merle followed, her voice shaky as she greeted me but holding herself with forced dignity. The investment rivals entered together, glaring at each other as if each believed the other guilty by default. The chauffeur slunk in last, avoiding my eyes and Wolfe's entirely. Wolfe surveyed them with mild disdain. We are complete. Archie, close the doors. I did. Wolfe settled into his chair and folded his hands across his stomach. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, you are here because Harold Merle is dead, Lydia Verdon is in danger, and the truth has been deliberately obscured. I have no patience for obscurity. Dowlard stiffened. I refuse to be accused in this circus. I have not accused you, Wolfe said. Yet. Mrs. Merle gasped softly. Kramer's eyebrows climbed halfway up his forehead. Wolfe continued, Mr. Merle discovered evidence of internal theft, money funneled from your business accounts, Mr. Dowlard, into a private channel. He sought to identify the culprit. Before he could reveal his findings, he was murdered. Dowlard swallowed. You're alleging one of us. No, Wolfe said sharply. I allege nothing. I reason. He lifted the torn scrap of ledger paper between two fingers. This fragment, he said, was entrusted to Miss Verdon. It contains part of the truth. The rest was taken by someone who feared exposure. One of the rivals leaned forward. Are you suggesting Harold was blackmailing someone? No, Wolfe replied. Harold was not that stupid. But someone else was that desperate. The chauffeur shifted in his chair. Wolfe noted the movement. You, sir, he said, are unusually restless. The chauffeur stammered, I'm just tired. I worked late. Indeed, Wolfe said. And were you also working late the night Harold Merle's office was ransacked? A ripple went through the room. Kramer took a step forward. You have evidence, Wolfe. I have inference, Wolfe said. The chauffeur's eyes darted from face to face. I didn't do anything. I just drove Mr. Merle. I don't know about any. A knock interrupted him. Everyone froze. Archie Goodwin, ace detective, world-class trooper, opened the door carefully. Saul Panzer entered. And he was holding something. A sheet of paper, torn along the top edge. The missing page. Wolfe's eyes gleamed. Ah! The rest of the ledger. Kramer barked, Panzer. Where did you get that? Saul said calmly, from a trash bin behind the garage where this gentleman, he nodded at the chauffeur, was seen earlier this morning. All eyes turned on the chauffeur, whose face had gone the shade of curdled cream. I didn't put it there, he sputtered. I don't know what that is. No. Wolfe said. Then you will not mind if Inspector Kramer examines it. Kramer snatched the page. His eyes widened. Wolfe, this signature. Wolfe lifted a hand. Inspector. I said we are not finished. He surveyed the room. The suspect stared back at him, angry, frightened, calculating. Wolfe took a slow sip from his beer. Tonight, he said, we lay bare the truth. And in the final chapter, he added, someone in this room will rue attending this gathering. Kramer growled, stop dragging it out, Wolfe. What are you implying? Wolfe closed his eyes. Everything, Inspector. And that was the moment I knew. The next chapter was going to hurt somebody. Badly. Chapter 8, The Corpse Speaks and the Killer Falls. When Nero Wolfe clears his throat before speaking, the room instinctively prepares for Judgment Day. Chairs stop creaking. Cigars freeze halfway to lips. Even Inspector Kramer goes still, which is no small miracle. This time was no exception. Wolfe placed the newly recovered ledger page flat on his desk, next to the torn scrap Lydia had surrendered. The two pieces fit together like dancers in a grim tango, numbers aligned, initials matched, and the signature at the bottom completed itself like a puzzle snapping shut. "Ladies and gentlemen," Wolfe said, "the dead man will now testify." The chauffeur let out a strangled noise. "What? How? Why?" "By his records, sir," Wolfe said sharply. "Not by seance. Do be sensible." Dallard leaned forward. "What does it show?" "It shows," Wolfe began, "that substantial sums, $80,000 in total, were removed from your investment accounts and funneled into a private reservoir. A shadow account. One not belonging to you, Mr. Dallard, despite your initial." "That's preposterous," Dallard snapped. "That's my signature, my Q." "Someone forged it?" "Yes," Wolfe said, "but clumsily." Merle noticed the inconsistency. That was why he tore off the evidence, Miss Verdon's fragment, before confronting whoever perpetrated the deceit. Mrs. Merle raised a trembling hand. "Then Harold discovered the thief?" "He discovered," Wolfe said, "something more damning than mere theft. He discovered collusion." Kramer barked, "Who with?" Wolfe let the room steep in silence before answering. "The chauffeur." The reaction landed like a dropped piano. Gasps. A muttered curse. The chauffeur leapt to his feet. "That's a lie. I never, Merle hardly talked to me." Wolfe gestured lazily at him. "Sit. Your theatrics only confirm your guilt." The chauffeur's hands shook. I just drove him. That's all." "No," Wolfe said. "You also delivered documents. You handled keys. You were trusted. And you were bribed." All eyes snapped to him. Wolfe's lip curled. "Merle's investigation threatened someone far above you, a person with access to Dallard's personal seal, financial ledgers, and staff. Someone who feared ruin if Merle spoke." Dallard's face drained to a lighter shade of ivory. "Are you saying, someone in my office?" "Yes," Wolfe said. "Your chief financial administrator. A Mr. Rutledge." Dallard stiffened. "Rutledge? Impossible. He's been with me 20 years. "Precisely," Wolfe said. "Which made him complacent, and bold." The chauffeur's eyes flickered. "A tiny, fatal betrayal." Wolfe pressed on. "He siphoned funds, forged your initials, and used the chauffeur to deliver false records to Merle, records that Merle immediately saw through. When Merle began closing in, Rutledge panicked. He paid this man," Wolfe pointed at the chauffeur, "to retrieve the incriminating page from Merle's office." Kramer growled, "Which explains the ransacking." "Indeed," Wolfe said. But Merle returned earlier than expected, catching the thief mid-search. A struggle ensued. The chauffeur panicked and shot him. The chauffeur lunged forward. "No. It was Rutledge. Rutledge told me," he said he'd kill me if I didn't." "Ah," Wolfe said softly, "now we approach truth." I moved fast and grabbed the chauffeur before he could bolt. He struggled like a wet fish but eventually settled into the resigned slump of a man who'd run out of exits. Kramer pounced. "So you admit you shot Merle?" "He was gonna expose us." Rutledge swore nobody would get hurt, he just needed the page. "But Merle, he fought." Wolfe sighed heavily. "Violence begets violence. A principle as old as civilization." Dallard looked shattered. "Rutledge, stealing from me? For how long?" "Years," Wolfe said. But the escalation in the last quarter triggered Merle's scrutiny. He traced the pattern, isolated the anomaly, and separated this page from the ledger as proof. Rutledge knew he was finished. So he used Lydia. Lydia, pale as parchment, whispered, "Used me?" "Yes," Wolfe said. "Rutledge knew Merle trusted you more than anyone. He believed Merle might reveal his findings to you, so he attempted to manipulate you into appearing complicit. A framed suspect deflects suspicion. And killing Merle at your rendezvous ensured your guilt." "I didn't know," Lydia breathed. "I didn't know any of it." "No," Wolfe said gently. "Your only mistake was being trusted." Kramer cuffed the chauffeur and signaled his men, who had been waiting outside the door since he'd arrived. "We'll bring in Rutledge," he said grimly. "Where is he?" "Gone," Wolfe replied. "He fled when his accomplice failed to retrieve the torn ledger page. Saul Panzer discovered his apartment empty and his luggage removed." Kramer's shoulders slumped. "He'll cross state lines." "Quite possibly," Wolfe said. "But you will find him. He is desperate, and desperate men are sloppy." Kramer grunted. "For once, Wolfe, you've handed me a case on a platter." "Not on a platter," Wolfe corrected. "I detest platters. Too flat." The aftermath. After the suspects were marched out, the office regained its normal proportions. There's something about removing criminals that restores feng shui, even if Wolfe would never stoop to using such a term. Lydia remained in her chair, trembling but intact. "You are free," Wolfe told her. "No charges will be brought against you." She looked up weakly. "Thank you. Thank you both." "Thank Merle," Wolfe said. "He entrusted you with the key. We merely unlocked the door." She began to cry quietly, the kind of crying people do when fear finally leaves their body after overstaying its welcome. "I fetched tissues." Wolfe fidgeted, which is what passes for compassion in his dialect. Kramer lingered in the doorway. "Goodwin," he said, "don't get smug. You're still a pain in the neck." "Necks exist for that purpose," I replied. He snorted, half amused, half irritated, then stomped out. Fritz appeared soon after with a tray of sandwiches, which Lydia politely declined and Wolfe consumed without shame. The house settled. The mystery settled. Wolfe leaned back, satisfied. "Archie. This case proves an old principle." "Which one?" I asked. "That the simplest motive is often wrapped in the most convoluted scheme." "Meaning greed?" "Yes," Wolfe said. "But greed combined with incompetence is fatal." "To poor Merle," I said. "To many," Wolfe replied. "One must choose one's accomplices wisely." I grinned. "If I ever choose one, it won't be a chauffeur." Wolfe harumphed. "Your choices are frequently indefensible." "Thank you," I said. He glared. That was not praise. Sounded like it. Pfui. He reached for his beer. "Archie. Yeah. No more midnight rendezvous with corpses." "No promises," I said. And that was the end of it. Another murderer caught. Another fragile witness saved. Another day in the detective business of Nero Wolfe and Archie Goodwin.